So, how about a little early development of empires? I figured I'd make a video about my science fiction action adventure universe called Empires. I've mentioned it a bunch of times in other videos and over at Patreon, but I wanted to get a bit more background detail into the story and its creation in my mind. This is basically a history of empires, the universe, its development in the real world. I'll make some videos about the history of the setting from an in-universe perspective at some time. Um, let's see, I'll start with the original desire to create a science fiction story of my own. Uh, like a lot of kids, Star Wars was an early gateway for me. I saw that as a kid, fell in love, and started looking at other science fiction shows like Star Trek, which was in syndication at the time, and then, of course, Battlestar Galactica and other things. Over time, I added more newcomers, things like Babylon 5, Stargate SG-1. These all got added to my list of favorites. There's actually a lot more. It would just be impractical to list them all. But as I was forming the idea for my own universe, for creating my own universe, I first toyed with a lot of unoriginal thoughts and ideas. Early designs for vehicles and characters were unoriginal, and really they were just reimagined Star Wars and Star Trek type stuff. I mean, this was decades ago when I was a little kid. There were, uptight military types. There were rogues and damsels. Basically a population of uninteresting tropes. I didn't really understand why I was unsatisfied with these creations. I just knew that they weren't really sticking with me long term. I'd come up with a character or something, and I'd think it was kind of cool at first, but after a while, I was like, this really isn't as interesting as I thought. It's not as good as I thought. It was hard for me to think about what I wanted, what sort of story I wanted to tell. Science fiction settings are frequently mirrors to the human condition and reflect what was on the minds of their creators at the time. Science fiction, fantasy. I mean, really, all fiction is a mirror of the creator. Gene Roddenberry created Star Trek, for example. He wanted to portray a potential future where humanity had largely overcome its darkest impulses, and we would strive to create a better future for us all. They would have good principles and ethics embodied by Starfleet and the Federation. At the time, society was consumed by political negativity and the stresses of the Vietnam War, and it seemed like people needed a reason to look ahead to what we could accomplish. On the other hand, George Lucas created Star Wars, but he wanted to portray brave rebels who stood up to the might of an evil galactic empire, an empire that seemed all powerful and all pervading. These these rebels would barely get by, but they remained unbroken in their drive for a better society that they were willing to fight for. Other series had socio-political angles, some large, some small. Battlestar Galactica, humans want to escape genocide at the hands of the Cylons. In Stargate, an overmatched and outnumbered Earth carries out a clandestine war against cruel overlords while they're trying to recruit allies. And in Firefly, you've got one guy who was on the losing side of a civil war. They don't really touch on the politics of that war, but now he just wants to live his life and be left alone, but he keeps finding himself dragged into ethical conflicts. So you've got everything from you know, genocide of an entire species all the way down to one guy who just wants to be left alone and everything in between. And you can write a science fiction story about all these things. Uh, but I had to ask myself, what did I want? It took some time and some growth and some maturity, but I knew I wanted to tell a story about two great nations in space, two empires, hence the name, and their Cold War, a standoff between these civilizations and their differing societies. I myself lived through the last years of the actual Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, and it was a defining time that left a deep cultural impact. The Cold War was a really tense time. There were border skirmishes and brushfire wars. They were carried out by proxies. And each time we might wonder, is this it? Is this the one that causes the missiles to launch? Is this the one that triggers the nuclear war? One thing about the Cold War that I wanted to bring into my fiction was the moral ambiguity and the ethical murkiness of things. I didn't want the good guy Central Alliance and the bad guy Irikanoy Republic. Both of these empires have their arguments in favor and their darker sides. So I guess what I really wanted was a story about decent people, or at least mostly decent people, trying to get by in difficult situations. The ethical compromises, the principled stands, and so on. That to me was much more interesting than cut and dried set pieces between, freemen and bogeymen. So at one point, I made a decision that, in retrospect, really made all the difference in the world. I was kind of having a hard time pinning down what I wanted, but I started to think about what I didn't want, and I parsed everything down from there. I knew one thing I didn't want was I didn't want magic. In empires, there's no force, there's no society of samurai space wizards, there are no psionics, there are no mind readers, um, we don't have any shapeshifters, just ordinary people doing what they can. Superpowered monsters are not responsible for pain and suffering. Ordinary people are. And ordinary people can stop it if they want to. But no one else can. Because in empires, no Superman is coming to save you. I also didn't want too much ultra fantastic technology that could be mistaken for magic. FTL travel and communication is done with wormholes, which, according to theories currently being postulated, don't actually break the faster than light barrier. They're kind of a workaround. Other drives include a sort of warping field similar to the theorized Alcubierre drive of warp fields. On the other hand, don't get the wrong idea, it's not hard SF. I love the Expanse, I enjoy the heck out of that, but I wanted some fantastic tech, if only just to make things a little bit easier. But I'm just not interested in writing stories about calculating how fuel burn ratios affect mass and acceleration. I mean, it's important, and like I said, the Expanse is awesome, but yeah, it's just not the kind of story I'm interested in focusing on. Probably the most fantastic technology I have is the casual application of gravity control on ships, including inertial dampeners. There are pulsed energy weapons similar to Star Wars blasters, but lasers are also used, and they have, a steady beam of light that is invisible. A variety of weapons are used, including electromagnetic rail and coil guns. Even gunpowder still has some utility, although pulsed energy weapons still dominate the battlefields. So, I guess really there you have it. I wanted to tell stories of ethical conflicts and compromises with high tension politics in a space opera type setting. One that is a little bit more grounded and a little bit less fantasy. Um, I'll go into more detail in other videos, but this was pretty much the, the building blocks, the fundamentals of the story, how it all gelled together, and what to expect. I'll go into more detail with later videos, and I'll probably get down in the weeds on very specific aspects of this. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're looking at and where I'm going to go with this. So hopefully this whets your appetite for empires, and hopefully you'll be interested to tune in and see more as I create it. So thanks for listening to me ramble, and until later, yeah, take care of each other. Bye.